What's good, folks? This is SilentMode, maker, artist, and LEGO Enthusiast, and I wanted to bore you guys with a few of my thoughts about Charlie Kirk and his recent passing. It came as a shock to me because, like most of you, I found out in the early hours of the morning last week, first that he'd been shot, and then later that he died from his injuries. It was particularly shocking because I was familiar with Charlie Kirk. I had seen some of his clips online, and he appeared to be a very popular person. He went on college campuses primarily talking to the younger generation about Christianity and conservative politics. He's also been credited with winning the youth votes for Donald Trump's re-election. And I actually remember in high school I was being taught that popular people were less likely to be targeted compared to somebody who was on their own or had very few friends. And it was very shocking because Charlie Kirk seemed to be a very popular person despite the controversy. And so it was bewildering to me that he would be targeted like that apparently the security was so lax that he could be targeted. But that's neither here nor there. Apart from it could be a good reason why there's so much uproar. Well, apart from the fact that this was a very shocking incident. I personally don't think a lot of fuss would have been made if he hadn't been incredibly popular, considered good looking, or he didn't have a wife and 2 kids. I think he had 2 kids, or he had children anyway. You could even argue that not such a fuss would have been made if he was a race other than white, but either way, he probably wouldn't have been able to escape it in the news. It was a horrible incident, and I don't really have anything more to add. Just that apart from the college campus videos, I was familiar with him from one episode of the Whatever podcast where he was talking to OnlyFans girls. One thing I really appreciated about him from that episode was that he wasn't overly preachy, but he was steadfast in his perspectives and trying to advise people rather than pressure them or convince them to do otherwise. I really appreciated that he stood up for Christianity in a world that seems to be primarily about 2 other religions, which I won't go into. And I credit him in some small part, for reintroducing me to God, especially with everything that's been happening this year and the widespread worship of AI. I know that even though things have been steadily going downhill for me personally, I'm being looked after by a higher power that I call God. As I said, I don't really have much to add. I'm not doing this for clout. I was deliberate in waiting for quite a while to gather my thoughts and doing this completely freestyle video. But there were a couple of things I wanted to touch on, which was the idea of celebrating somebody's death or downfall, and this idea of free speech. In particular, one thing that Charlie Kirk pushed, and that was engaging with people who may have differing opinions. First of all, I think it's particularly sick to celebrate somebody's death, and even to celebrate somebody having a bad day or some, bad things happening to people. Now, while I do believe in the idea of karma, borrowing from the Hindu religion, or the idea of, what's the term? I completely forgot. Justice, perhaps. I don't go around laughing at people when something bad happens to them. I actually have a policy of not laughing at people. I do find certain things funny, but I certainly wouldn't wish anything bad to happen to somebody. Otherwise, I should expect somebody to find something funny when it happens to me. But there's a lot of people in the mainstream LEGO space, in the 3D printing space, and in other spaces who probably shouldn't be talking anything with regard to either free speech or celebrating somebody's downfall or whatever. I did think it was particularly disgusting to hear about people celebrating, in quotes, somebody's death. I don't know if they were paid actors, if they were coerced or influenced into doing it, but it's a particularly disgusting thing, in my opinion. The other thing about free speech, I guess the other thing I appreciate about Charlie Kirk was that he encouraged engaging in conversation with people who have differing viewpoints, not necessarily to convert or convince them of my viewpoints, because everybody has their perspectives and their own take on things, but to let other people know that there is another viewpoint to have. And it's one thing I have seen in the spaces that I've been involved in. There's a narrative, and if you don't follow that narrative, then you're essentially blackballed and isolated and ostracized. Whether it's this idea in the Lego space that you have to agree with DEI or what passes as DEI, or in the 3D printing space where you have to like certain content creators and influencers, etc. Or I guess you can think of plenty of other things in other spaces. But yes, I'd like to think that I'm willing to engage with people. I'm certainly willing to have the conversation with people. But let's consider not making things too personal for very long. It's been 5 years, almost 5 years, since I've raised my issues with the mainstream Lego space, and nobody from the mainstream Lego space has taken a bit of interest, which is why I tend to go in on them, and you may get tired of me talking about it, but it's in the context of having the conversation, being willing to have the conversation. And to paraphrase what Charlie Kirk said before his passing, when the conversation stops is when the violence begins. And I certainly don't want things to get to the stage of violence, but that's out of my hands because it seems I'm the only one that's willing to talk. Those are my raw thoughts. I haven't scripted any of this except to make some notes about what I wanted to talk about. Thank you for humoring me. And the only thing I've got to say is rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. Thank you for the motivation. Thank you for reintroducing me to a higher power that I choose to call God. And hopefully your legacy will continue. This has been SilentMode, maker, artist, and LEGO enthusiast, encouraging you all to have the conversation and to do your thing.